Steve Bowers welcoming you to Dialogue here at E Plus TV6 and a special opportunity to visit with Tony Lance, who's the manager with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation in this, the 75th year of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Tony, good to have you with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Steve.
We're going to get into many things about the Wildlife Federation in its 75th year, but how did you get into this line of work?
Well, it was really kind of serendipitous. By trade, I'm a journalist, editor and writer, and
Okay.
I was living in New York City. I'm from this area, Middle Tennessee, but I was living in New York City at the time of the Great Recession back in 2008, and life became kind of untenable for me. So I moved back here, and one thing led to another. I started working for Metro Parks in Nashville, and then started volunteering here at the Federation, and that led to me being here full-time about 8 years ago.
In journalism, you have a specific area that you were working in, or general reporter, editor? What were you doing?
Magazine work, feacher writing.
Right.
Tennis was my big beat. I'm a tennis player from a long time ago, and I was covering tennis.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you go from tennis to wildlife. All
Well,
right. So
it's
what
true.
in your background oriented you to wildlife?
You know, I'm a farm boy from Springfield, and I grew up being aware of nature. Since I was a kid, I've had an abiding interest in birds. And so I've been a bird watcher. In fact, when I lived in New York City, I occasionally did bird walks in Central Park for people there. So I started doing the same thing when I moved back here to the Nashville area. I was working for Metro Parks doing volunteer bird walks at some of the parks.
Okay.
That just led to other things, and here I am.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
One thing, journalism has gone through such a contraction out there. I mean,
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it's just been amazing. The staff reductions, in some cases, publications that have just ceased operation.
Yeah.
As you've seen in Nashville, we saw in Memphis with the Press Scimitar and the Banner and all this stuff,
Yep.
just going away. And now the consolidations are just horrific almost.
Yeah, and I guess the quality of journalism is one thing that seems to have suffered. It seems like anybody with an internet connection these days can be a journalist,
Right.
and that's a shame. But anyway, it is what it is.
It is what it is, and that's a big change. Well, in Nashville, though, so you catch on with the parks there. So it was reflective of your background interest in wildlife.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm a hiker, backpacker, bird watcher, gardener, beekeeper. All those things kind of converge to bring me where I am today.
One of the things we'll do in this dialogue with Tony is we'll talk about turning your backyard into a way to enhance wildlife and preservation of and everything else, because it's a challenge issue out there. How extensive is the national park system? What all does that include?
Well, Nashville is pretty blessed to have a considerable amount of land, public land in their park system. For example, Bell's Bend over in the Old Hickory area, kind of northwest of Nashville, has about 800 acres.
Wow.
I think it's actually close to 1,000 now with a recent acquisition. Warner Parks are among the biggest in the country. So there's a whole lot of public land. And in fact, there's some that's recently acquired that I think is not even yet open to the public. But Nashville is blessed in that respect.
Because when you go to Nashville now, the thing that's most pronounced is things are construction cranes.
Yeah, that's those when you talk about cranes in Nashville, you're not talking about the birds, you're talking about the construction cranes.
Yeah, and so in the midst of that, hundreds of acres then within that city that are still part of. Because I think about the Parthenon area, there's some areas that you see that you think about, but then obviously there are many other areas.
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely, and having that kind of land, we as people need green space. I think that's important for our health as human beings. And getting out in nature just makes us happier and healthier human beings, I think.
Yeah. It is interesting to me, we'll get on with other things, but it is interesting that in our history, Theodore Roosevelt and others were, I mean, we take national parks now, Yellowstone, whatever, we take all this stuff for granted, but it was not easily done. There was great resistance to that economically in those days, as it is now, as to how those lands should be most profitably used and managed. And there were many people that said that it should be in the hands of private developers. The government should not be involved in setting aside land and holding title to it, because it was considered a waste of resources out there. And so it was hard fought. I think we look at state parks and all these other things now and just to kind of take it for granted. Well, yeah, it's a great idea, but it was not considered that way.
Well, the United States was certainly in the forefront in the park system. No other place in the world had the park system. That was, we pioneered that really. And it's something we should very much be proud of as Americans.
Yeah, because as you say, it is a place of of refreshing and everything else. And
Mhm.
but when you go to those, and we are blessed in Tennessee certainly with an
Yes.
amazing park system, but
Mhm.
it did not happen, and it did not happen without resistance.
That's
You know,
that's true.
yeah,
That's quite true.
the,
And
you know,
another thing, people don't realize is it wasn't that long ago that there was unregulating market hunting. And we in North America lost a number of iconic species. For example, the passenger pigeon. I don't know if you're familiar with that bird, but at 150 years ago, it was probably the single most common bird in the world.
wow.
I mean, flocks of passenger pigeons would sometimes migrate from the north and go across this area in flocks so thick that it would block out the sun for hours. And in, I think, around 1914, as a result of just unregulated slaughter of these birds, they're now extinct.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting when you get to talking to people. Of course, some people are aversive to hunting or whatever, but then, when you talk about our wildlife is probably much healthier now with hunters and management and everything else, like ducks and everything else, because everybody's got a vested interest, whatever their motivation, that it has enabled the deer herds and everything else to proliferate. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Hunters and anglers are critical to conservation in our country. I mean, the license fees that they pay directly fund wildlife management. And it's only because of them that we have healthy populations of ducks in this country. And elk have been restored to Tennessee. There are all kinds of success stories. And it comes at the heels of hunters and anglers.
Tony, when did that that transition into wildlife management then start? If we hunted out those pigeons that were so prevalent,
Mhm.
what was the key in turning the awareness? Was that part of it?
Yes, it was. There was a growing awareness in the early part of the 20th century that something needed to be done. And formation of our organization, the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, which started in 1946 as the Tennessee Conservation League, was a direct result of growing awareness that the wildlife needs to be managed. You can't just have unregulated hunting and fishing.
So the Tennessee Conservation League, and we're once again in the 75th anniversary of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation.
Mhm.
Tennessee Conservation League was formed with what purpose, and what was its initial duty?
Well, pretty much like I was saying, that there was an awareness that things weren't just going right, that wildlife needed to be held in the public trust. And that basic understanding was the genesis of that whole movement, and which led to us being here.
Yeah, it is and it's very different. Wildlife we consider, and it is considered, wildlife belongs to all of us.
It belongs to all of us.
Where if you go into feudal societies or whatever, it was the property of the king. You couldn't
Correct.
kill a deer because you're poaching the king's property, because the
Correct.
king owns the land, or the landlords. The landlords own the wildlife.
I'm
And so
impressed that you know that.
yeah, it is it's a real fundamental concept in this country, and that guides all of this is that wildlife belongs to everyone. If it crosses,
Absolutely.
it may be on your land, but it doesn't belong to you.
Correct. And that's fundamental to everything that we believe in as an organization.
Okay. And that is not without some resistance. Even today, some people say, well, my land, my stuff. And it's
Yeah,
like,
I can
well,
understand that to a degree. I disagree with it, but I can understand it.
yeah. So there you go. We're going to continue this conversation. Tony Lance is with us, 75th anniversary of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. And then Tony does a great deal of work in helping people turn their backyards into areas that are conducive for habitat, or say backyards, or your lawns into conducive areas for wildlife.
Mhm.
And so we'll get into all that discussion. So stay with us. We'll continue this dialogue right here at T Plus TV.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Welcome back to Dialogue here at E Plus TV6 and a conversation with Tony Lance, who's a manager with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation in its 75th anniversary year. We'd picked up about the Tennessee Conservation League and its formation in 1946. We're coming out of World War II. Did that have anything to do with this, or just what was happening in land management and recognition of need for?
I think it's more the latter. I can't say that the war had a direct effect on it. I think, again, it was just the growing consensus that something needed to be done to help properly manage our natural resources, wildlife.
The Wildlife Federation evolved how out of all of that?
Well, again, in February of 1946, a group of outdoor writers, sportsmen, community leaders got together in Chattanooga, and they decided that something needed to be done to conserve wildlife. And they formed the Tennessee Conservation League. And
So a sports writer.
yeah, it was a whole group of people
Okay.
across the board.
Okay, so they put this thing together and it evolved. So when you look at it now, Tony, what all does the Tennessee Wildlife Federation do today, 75 years later?
We have a number of different programs. One of our biggest is we have our fingers on the pulse of the legislature, our policy arm. We have several people who try to keep track with what's going on that's related to wildlife in the legislature. We push legislation. In fact, we're working on a called the Tennessee Clean Act, which is a litter bill. And you can find that on our website. We recognize that there's a big problem with litter here in the state, and we're trying to do something about that. Over the years, we have pushed through the legislature, shepherded the right to hunt and fish. It was an amendment, and that's something that we're very proud of as an organization.
When we get into this, and there, we were talking off camera about, first time I went to Natchez Trace, I didn't understand that there's a division of state parks and there's a division of forestry.
Correct.
And they, to a certain extent, the parks, they're recreational housing, all kinds of different things, walking trails and all these other things.
Mhm.
Division of forestry's got a whole different priority. And so they're in proximity, but they have different nuances in what they do. And
Correct. And TWRA is different from those. I mean, that's a separate
yeah.
organization from those two.
Yeah, and so so I may be on the lake there at Natchez Trace, but I may be running into somebody from the TWRA asking me about a fishing license.
Correct.
There's also the conservancies, and there are other things out there. So there are different organizations that are doing different things within all this big umbrella.
That's correct. And we try to partner whenever we can to work on take advantage of synergies. We may do something better than somebody else, and they may do something better than us. And occasionally we work together. One great example, if I can throw one out there, I don't know if you caught wind of it, but this past summer, there was an issue with purple martins roosting at the Nashville Symphony on their campus. There were probably 150,000 purple martins that were coming to roost every night, starting around July and into August. And they were causing such a mess that the Nashville Symphony was going to use a non-toxic spray to disperse them. And we stepped in when we found out about it, and in conjunction, working together with the Nature Conservancy of Tennessee, we raised money to offset their cleanup costs in return for them not disturbing the birds. So it was a wonderful effort, and we got quite a bit of press about that. The New York Times picked it up, NPR picked it up, and we raised about $26,000 in a matter of a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do y'all do with blackbird, Tony? We were talking when I first moved to West Tennessee, and that's been 50 plus years ago.
Yeah.
The blackbirds, for whatever reason, roosted in Milan, and they'd get out cannon and everything else because they just took over the city.
Yeah.
I don't know where they've gone. They're still here, obviously, but they're not roosting in Milan the way they used to.
Yeah. Yeah, blackbirds can roost in huge numbers, crows as well. I mean, that's the thing that just, it happens in the wintertime when they're not in breeding season and spread all out. But yeah.
So like in that situation with the priority of the symphony is we got to get them out of here. The cleanup and everything else is a mess and everything else. Your priority is trying to find some way that we can help everybody.
Absolutely. Our goal was a win-win in that particular situation, and it worked out very well. We gave money to the symphony, they cleaned things up. Now the birds will very likely come back next year. I'm not sure what the outcome will be this year actually. But I'm not sure how that will work out. But at least for the time being, it was a win-win.
All right. If people want to keep up with the work of the Wildlife Federation, what's the best way to do that?
Our website, we have a very robust and constantly updated website and social media. Our website is tnwf.org.
What all will I find there, Tony?
Oh, you'll find a complete rundown on all of our programs, a history of the organization, our annual awards, social media links. You can find out how to take your backyard and get it certified as a wildlife habitat. You can spend a full day there, really.
tnwf.org. Can I become part of the Wildlife Federation?
Well, we used to have a membership structure and we've gotten away from that. So when you say be a part of it, we don't have memberships anymore. We certainly have donors, and a lot of our former members are now donors, but we don't have a membership per se.
Participation. What is the relationship with the TWRA and the Tennessee Wildlife Federation?
Well, the Tennessee Conservation League, when it was formed in 1946, eventually led to the formation of TWRA, and we do work in conjunction with them on a lot of things. They fund us, some of our programs, our shooting sports program. They provide a great deal of funding for us on that. So there is a hand-in-hand working relationship with TWRA, certainly.
Okay, so just be aware of that. But once again, these agencies have a distinct history and purpose. And the TWRA came out of the work of the Conservation League and the Tennessee Wildlife Federation.
Yes.
So it all and provides, as noted, those sports licenses have become a very, very important thing as far as protecting wildlife and habitat, which for those that are not involved with it seems contradictory. But it's
it does. But once you scratch beneath the surface and realize it's hunters and anglers have a vested interest in wildlife populations being healthy,
preserving and waterways and everything else. We come back, we want to talk about, and Tony Lance is with us, a manager with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. When we come back, we want to get into an area that is dear to his heart, and that is, how do you take your yard, your home, or whatever, and make that conducive for wildlife? And some people say, well, I wouldn't want it to be conducive for wildlife, but there are many, many things you can do that can be helpful to many species. And so we're going to find out about that as we continue. Tony Lance is with us, the 75th anniversary of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and this is Dialogue at East West.
What this place needs is better graduation rates.
What this place needs is less childhood obesity.
What this place needs is free help with taxes.
What this place needs is healthy breakfast.
What this place needs is fitness programs for kids.
What this place needs is early readers.
What this place needs is mentors for teens.
What this place needs is people to join us. What this place needs is you. To donate or volunteer, go to unitedway.org.
Hello, everybody. Got something I want to tell you. You know, all my good friends at the Tennessee Wildlife Federation have been busier than a raccoon on a creek bank, making sure your wildlife will be around for generations to come. So how about setting a hook into the future of conservation by making a gift to support the Tennessee Wildlife Federation today? There's no place else like Tennessee, and together we can keep it that way.
Welcome back to Dialogue here at E+TV6 as we continue our conversation, about to wrap it up, in fact, with Tony Lance, who's a manager with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. It is the 75th anniversary of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. They started, as we do this program, in 1946 as the Tennessee Conservation League. Sports writers and sports and outdoor enthusiasts and others formed all this. You can find out more about this program and its work, tnwf.org, tnwf.org, to highlight the variety of things with which the Wildlife Federation is involved. Tony has a special background, and that is an interest in wildlife, and he has been pursuing this for years. The National Park System, he's been with the Federation since 2011. One of his areas of interest and expertise is taking your yard and making it more conducive for wildlife, which, I was talking to Tony recently. I said, well, I don't want a cougar in my backyard. but there are many other things that I can do that would be consistent with my home that are very, very important. We were talking about when I was a kid, there was clover all over the place and honeybees,
Mhm.
I don't find much clover. We've Bermudaed the yards and sprayed them and everything else. I don't find as many honeybee. So
Yeah,
there are things that we're doing that are impacting wildlife.
absolutely. And it used to be that you couldn't walk barefoot in the clover because
Yeah,
of so
you
many
always get a bee
bees.
sting. That's just part of life,
That was part of life. Yeah. Well, the thing that I want everybody to understand is that the bulk of land right now, 90% of the land in Tennessee is in private hands. And if we want to create more habitat for wildlife, we've got to look to ourselves to do that. Now, I'm not talking about taking your backyard and making it friendly for cougars or big animals. But what I'm talking about is making it more friendly to birds and pollinators and small critters. Because a lot of those things, a lot of those species are being pushed out by development. And there are little things, if we all work together and make small changes in each of our backyards, it'll be incredible what we can do.
All right, so where do we start?
Native plants. That's probably the big thing that I could get across to everybody is use native plants in your landscaping. And the question might be, well, what do I plant?
Right.
The first thing I would throw out there is be aware of the National Wildlife Federation's website. We are an affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation, nwf.org. And if you go to their Gardening for Wildlife page, you will find a native plant finder when you can put in your zip code and it will tell you native plants for your area. But things like butterfly milkweed, for example, you've probably seen growing along roadsides, this beautiful orange plant that blooms in the summertime. That's butterfly milkweed, and that's one of the host plants for monarch butterflies. I think it'd be awesome if everybody planted butterfly milkweed in their yard. Not only because it's orange, but because it works well for monarch butterflies.
Is this a bush or what, shrub, whatever? What is this?
It's a perennial flower. It's not a bush or
Flower.
shrub. It dies back every year, but it comes back. It's pretty hardy, and it produces these beautiful orange flowers. And the leaves are hosts for monarch butterfly larvae.
Okay. If I go to a nursery, will they know what I'm asking for? If I say, well, I'm interested in making things conducive for birds and for pollinators, will they be able to help me?
Yes, in fact, just about any nursery should be able to help you with native plants. And there are nurseries that are popping up all across the state that specialize in native plants. So you shouldn't have any trouble with that. Finding native plants is really pretty easy these days.
Something else other than the milkweed that you recommend to people to consider immediately?
There are all kinds of things. I'm really fond of black-eyed Susans because they grow easily. They're prolific. I've started using a lot of switchgrass in my plantings here at the office and as well as at home. It's a beautiful native grass that's very drought tolerant. It has a deep, extensive root system, so it handles our August just fine and grows beautifully. It makes a nice big clump, and it provides great cover for wildlife, birds and rabbits and things like that. So those are three that I use extensively.
I know there's been great concern about the honeybees. How are we doing there?
Well, let me say, first of all, I'm a beekeeper, but honeybees are not native. So I just want to throw that caveat out there. But
how did they
honeybees
get here?
Yeah,
Because they've become very important in the pollination, right?
they are, but honeybees were brought over with European colonists, and they certainly are important pollinators. But we have hundreds and hundreds of native pollinators that are not doing well either. But what's happening with honeybees is really distinct from that.
Okay. So what are the native pollinators then, Tony?
We have native bees and wasps and butterflies and moths.
So what we call bumblebees, are those native?
Yes, they are. And bumblebees aren't doing all that well.
Okay. I don't even know what the plant is. Inadvertently, it has purple things on it and it attracts bumblebees. It doesn't attract very many honeybees. And I've wondered if that was reflective of the populations or whatever. But of course, I'm sure there are different kind of, I call a bumblebee, because somebody said, well, there's some with a white spot on them and there's some that don't. And so, I'm an amateur, but at least I inadvertently, I planted some plant and it's grown up and it attracts them. So I feel I'm doing pretty good right there. Are there certain bird populations that are challenged?
Yes, grassland birds in particular are having trouble. Things like bobwhite quail, for example, eastern meadowlarks, grasshopper sparrows, birds that depend on open grasslands, their numbers are plummeting considerably because, think about it, that's the kind of space the developers like. And there's such a housing boom in this area, particularly in Middle Tennessee, that grassland is just disappearing at a rapid pace.
Wow. So that would take a larger thing. In my yard, are there things I can do like for bluebirds or something that would help?
Absolutely. I mean, bluebirds, of course, they're cavity nesters, so you need to put out a bluebird box for them. If you put a bluebird box out, make sure that you have a predator guard on it. Put it in an open area so that squirrels can't, jump from a tree and get onto it, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, bluebirds are pretty easy to attract to your yard.
Are they in decline?
Their numbers have stabilized. There was a time a few decades ago that their numbers went free fall just because cavities were in short supply. And there was competition from house sparrows, which are an introduced species from Europe, and starlings as well. And so they were on the losing end of that. But so many people have started putting out bluebird boxes that they're doing pretty well these days.
Okay, so that has been, and that's been as a result of some planned efforts, initiatives. Then.
Absolutely, yeah. People have worked together to bring the bluebird population back to pretty much normal.
Is it difficult to maintain this kind of wildlife habitat within your lawn?
No, no. In fact, a lot of native plants are well suited to this area, so they do rather well compared to, say, introduced exotic species that maybe don't tolerate our conditions as well as the natives.
Okay. Can it curtail the area I have to mow?
Well, I tell you what, I actually I have a 2-acre yard, and I took the front half of it, a front third of it, and let it grow, much to my neighbor's dismay, because I've got a big weed patch in my front yard, which has attracted all kinds of wildlife, birds in particular, but I have more rabbits than I really want.
Okay.
Yeah, but I planted that with a lot of native flowers, goldenrod, and bergamot, black-eyed Susan, and milkweed, and it did pretty well.
So there's somebody out there in your neighborhood with a backyard garden say he needs to move.
Yeah.
I'm tired of feeding the rabbits and the squirrels. Yeah.
Right. I live out in the county, so I think the zoning restrictions don't really affect me.
So go to the National Wildlife Federation website, nwf.org, and look up Gardening for Wildlife.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Well, Tony, it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Steve.
One thing I always appreciate for these opportunities, we wouldn't be talking about the Wildlife Federation probably if it weren't your 75th anniversary, but it opened the door and people can take advantage of that. Go to tnwf.org, tnwf.org. You get information on the work of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. And for Gardening for Wildlife, nwf.org, and look up that Gardening for Wildlife area.
Okay.
Tony, appreciate the time. I'm glad you came back to Tennessee.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
And continue to best. Hope to talk with you again soon.
Thanks
and thanks to you, Tony, for being with us, and thanks to you for being with us. And stay with us here at E+ TV Script, because this is the place where the dialogue.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Today I'm going to talk to you about physics. Come on in, girls. Let's go. This is the first rocket to get humans to Mars.
Really tall.
I'm a rocket structural engineer, designing and building parts of the rocket. You are the generation that will be stepping foot on Mars. Do I have a group of astronauts on my hands?
Yes.
You can become a rocket scientist or whatever else you want to be.